Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our Processing and Payroll 2.0 webinar. Your presenters will be Ty Whitcomb and Nathan Triplett. Ty Whitcomb is our Senior Consultant at SWK, and Nathan is our Sales Director. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the questions field in the window. We will address them at the end of the webinar. So with that said, let's get started. And Ty and Nathan, I'm handing it off to you.
Hello and welcome to our webinar. We are going to be going through Payroll 2.0. Nathan's going to come in a little bit after I kind of go through all my slides. He's going to do some slides to show you some other payroll offerings that we have that we can align and implement with your Sage system. And then we'll dive into the product and I'll actually kind of show you what the new Payroll 2.0 looks like. So let's go ahead and get started. So our agenda for today is Payroll 2.0. We're going to discuss how taxes work in the new system, how taxes are going to be delivered to us in the new system, and then we will hand it over for Nathan for the extending payroll to HR, and he's going to go through some of those pieces for us. So what is the Payroll 2.0? So Payroll 2.0 is the new UI or the new pretty version, I guess you can say, of Payroll. So we finally took Payroll 2.0 and it's now in the same framework like the sales order module, the inventory module. It's pretty, I guess is probably the best way to sum it up. And there's a whole lot more features that kind of went along with that. So one of the first big features that went along with Payroll 2.0 is now batch processing. Just like how you have batches in sales order inventory or AR invoice data entry or cash receipts entry or even GL transaction entry, you now have batches in payroll. So what this does, it allows you to run multiple pay cycles and payrolls all at the same time. So you know what your salaried employees are paid every single 2 weeks, 1 week, or however often you decide to pay them. But your hourly people, you might still be waiting for payroll stubs or for time clocks to come in or handwritten pieces of paper that are floating somewhere on somebody's desk to come in. Well, what you now have the ability to do is put all the salaried people into one batch, run their payroll, post and update. Meanwhile, you can have all the hourly people sitting in a separate batch waiting for you to get all their information and their calculations and numbers, and then you can leisurely post theirs. But this time now you're not waiting on both sides of the house, I guess you can say, to be able to post and have payroll process in the system. Then there's the new screens, like I said, framework. It's now the data entry grids are all in the 4.x. It's pretty. You have selection grids. You have a calculator button that's now all the dollar amount fields. Hyperlinks have been added. So whenever you're in the system in payroll data entry and maybe you need to flip over and look at an employee's information, you can now just click the little blue hyperlink for the employee and it will automatically launch employee maintenance for you. Similar to when you're in sales order entry, if you click the customer button, it launches customer maintenance. So earning and deduction codes have been expanded to 6 characters. It used to be you only could have 01 or 01 or 02 or TE. Now you have 6 characters and your descriptions have also been expanded out to 30 characters. And also with earnings there's a new thing in the system called tax rules. So back in the old payroll, payroll 1.x, if you want to say it from that standpoint, you used to have to know, okay, for taxes, check the box for FUTA, turn it off for Social Security, turn it on for this, turn it on for that. Now there's a tax rule that is assigned to every earnings code in the system. And if it's a regular earnings, all you do is select a tax rule for regular earnings and the system automatically knows how it needs to calculate taxes on it. Certain deduction codes will have that, but all earnings codes, if you're going to be using them in payroll, have to have a tax rule assigned to them. Department security has been moved over. The old department security was kind of once you gave somebody access, it shut everybody out in the system. Same thing, it's no different. but now it's the login ID as opposed to everybody's 3-digit user code. That is now in department security. And for department security, it's now is if you are trying to update a check register or an employee expense summary, but you only have access to one department, but not all the departments, it's not going to allow you to. You have to have access to every department if department of security is turned on for you to do check registers, employee expense summaries, and the different various reports like federal state tax reporting, period end processing, tax profiles. You have to have security access to be able to do that in the Sage 100 system. So time off, formerly known as benefit accruals. You used to have vacation, sick were defined, and then the third one was whatever you wanted it to be. Now with time off, all three are definable. You can make any three of them whatever you would like them to be. Vacation and sick are automatically defaulted that way just from a conversion standpoint, but you have the ability to change that to whatever you would like it to be. And also the decimal precision has been moved out to 3, and the system will then go ahead and make sure that it rounds correctly on that. In employee maintenance, you're going to notice it's a completely different UI. Employee last names are now 40 characters. First names are now 25 characters. You now have a middle name. You now have a suffix, or junior, senior, the third, if you want to look at it that way. And there's been 5 new tabs that has been added into the system to handle benefits and taxes, and earnings and deductions in the system that you did not have before. Before, it used to be a little button that would launch benefits or it would launch earnings and deductions. They've now cleaned up the screen and the UI, and now it's all accessible all at the same time. So the biggest issue that we always used to have was somebody was running checks, you jammed the printer, so on and so forth in the system, and you would go back in and restart again, and you would forget to change the check date, and then you would then have to throw away another set of checks because the date wasn't correct. Now in the system with the check date, it is now done at the very beginning when you start your payroll data entry. So when it pops up asking you what your pay cycle is, what the pay period ending and beginning date is, there is now a new field in there for check date in the system so that it knows what to do. The reason why that check date matters is because when you run your payroll tax calculation, it now uses that check date so that when it goes out into the World Wide Web to find out what the rates are as of that check date, it needs to know at that time to make sure it's applying the correct tax calculations for you. And I'll explain that a little bit more when we get to how taxes and tax rates in the system are now calculated or how they're updated in the system. So a lot of things has been renamed or removed. Here's a whole list of them. I will just pop out some of the big major ones. Tax table maintenance is gone. It's now called tax profile maintenance. Federal e-filing reporting and state e-filing reporting, they've been combined into one now called federal and state tax reporting. Benefit schedule maintenance is now called time off maintenance. And then all associated things that were labeled with benefits are now called time off, if you want to look at it from that standpoint in the system. Perpetual history has been removed just because now you can run multiple years of payroll in the system. So at the end of the year, you were rushing to close out your payroll, close out your quarter, so that you could be able to process. Now that payroll is just like sales order and some of the other modules in that it can hold history, and it's driven by date to know when it does things in the system. There is no perpetual history report. It's now just called a check history report just because now that doesn't really matter to the system how it calculates. So let's talk taxes. So taxes there's tax rules, there's tax groups, and now there's also called tax profiles. So let's start with tax rules. Actually, we're going to start with tax profiles. So let's start with tax profiles. Every state has a profile. Profiles are system-wide. So once you set it up for one, you set it up for all. So you will go into the system and set up a tax profile for all the states that you are going to be calculating taxes for. So if you're only going to be calculating, say for instance, for New York, you would only set up for New York. If you're only setting up for Virginia, you would set up for Virginia. If you're setting up for multiple states, then you would go and set up a tax profile for every state that you're choosing to calculate for. Then we have company tax groups. Company tax groups are now in the payroll setup menu. They are company specific, but this is where we used to have tax table maintenance. It's now called company tax group setup. And you would go in here and this is where you would put your tax ID numbers that are specific to the state that you're looking at in the system. This is where you would put the general ledger accounts that these need to post to. This is also where you would put your tax rates. So if you have, say, for instance, rates for unemployment, you would put in what the effective date is and what the rate is, and you would plug that in. Case in point, Virginia, I'm from Virginia, so I'm obviously speaking to this. So in the state of Virginia, you normally about the October timeframe, you will get a nice little letter from Virginia Unemployment Commission saying this is your rate for the year. Well, back in the olden days, you would have to keep that paper on somebody's desk or somebody's file somewhere or so forth in the system. Looking for that information until you have the ability to January 1 to put that new rate in. Now you don't need to. Now you would just go in here and plug in when that effective date for that rate is, put in whatever that percentage is in the system, and then kind of move forward from that point forward. Tax rules is every earnings code in the system, obviously some tax and some dependent code and some deduction code, will be assigned a tax rule. These tax rules determine how taxes are calculated. If you can kind of see my screenshot, you can see there's one in here that says no taxes. So if you have an earnings code for some reason that you want no taxes calculated, you would apply that in the system. We have holiday wages. We have in the system illness leave wages. We have jury duty leave wages. Depending on what your earnings code is, you would assign an appropriate tax rule, and the system would then calculate that information based off of what you've assigned to it. Tax rules are not company specific, but when you apply them to an earnings code, that earnings code for that specific company will then just use that global tax rule. So tax tables, how are tax tables? Tax tables are now cloud-based. So at the beginning of the year or every quarter, Sage will release a tax table update. You would have to call us, or if you were savvy enough, you would log on to the Sage website, you would download the tax table update, and you would apply that tax table update to your system. Well, that is no more. What ends up happening is every time that you go to run payroll, if you would launch, say, for instance, employee maintenance for this first time, or if you were going to payroll data entry, the system kind of does a call out to the World Wide Web and checks to see if there's a payroll tax update for you. If there is, it will prompt you. It's just going to say, hey, there's a new tax table update. Please have everybody exit in the system. You would hit proceed, and the system would then update those for you in the system. So now you don't have to download it. It is automatic, and it will automatically prompt you in the system. You also have the ability to run it manually if you want, underneath the utilities menu. And then once an update is installed on your system, if you would like to know what changes or along with that update, you can just run a payroll tax update report for the date that it was installed, and it will simply give you a description or a brief, just pretty much tell you what changed and so on and so forth, and it will give you a nice pretty report for that. There's a new feature in here called service notification maintenance. Every user that needs to have this. The reason why this is, if for some reason Sage is down, the tax calculation engine. So Sage is when you go in the system to tap the box for payroll tax calculation, that goes out to the World Wide Web just to make sure that it's calculating based off the latest taxes. If for some reason it is down, it will send you an email to let you know if there is an outage. Anytime Sage is doing maintenance to it, they will send you an email. There's other stuff that might go along with it, but you always have to set up at least one person in this for you to be able to access payroll. If not, it will prompt you every single time until you set somebody up in the system. So you just want to make sure you set up one person so that they're notified if there's any outages or maintenance that will be planned. And Nathan, I'm going to turn this over to you before we start the demo.
Perfect. Thanks, Ty. Again, folks, my name is Nathan Triplett. I lead our HCM practice here. And, you know, as Ty mentioned, we have a couple different options around payroll, but if you could take us to the next slide, Ty. One of the things I wanted to start with is just the fact, I mean, everything that we've heard so far today around Sage 100 payroll is there's a strategy, and there is a strategy, there's a roadmap from Sage, it's been defined. You know, I've been working with this product for about 10 years, and, you know, from my understanding, even another decade beyond that, there hasn't been a significant amount of change. But Sage has recognized there's a lot of folks that really leverage the Sage 100 payroll module to a pretty substantial level within their organization. And a lot of people have been using or working around some of the limitations of Sage 100 payroll. So bringing it to framework, getting you better reporting, better security, better functionality, all significant things. By the way, I do know we've shared quite a bit of information today. For anybody scribbling down, know we will be sending out slide decks after this. We'll be sending out a recording of the presentation. So we will get all this information to you. One thing I do want to highlight is Sage has done this for a while. Many of our Sage 100 payroll customers aren't aware, but they've really done it more within the new version as they're extending the functionality of payroll to HR. Whereas when this solution was architected, you know, back in the late 1980s, payroll was a strategic function within an organization and HR was more transactional, where fast forward 30, goodness, almost 40 years now, the roles have flipped, where HR is a very strategic function within an organization. I wouldn't say payroll is transactional, but there's certainly a lot more that we need to capture on HR, and Sage is recognizing that. I mean, if you saw employee maintenance, there's 6 new screens. But what they've also done is Sage does have an HR suite. If you could take us to the next slide, Ty. They've extended some of the HR functionality, not only to what you see here within the HR module. So a lot of organizations need to track additional information around benefit elections, run their affirmative action reporting, their EEO reporting, their OSHA logs, all those things that we can do out of our HR system while still leveraging Sage 100 payroll in an integrated or interface capacity. So we've got some nice screens here that are allowing us to capture the employee, send them over to payroll, keep that single point of record, and without adding a new solution or changing payroll systems, give some of the additional HR functioning and compliance information. And next slide, probably the biggest thing that Sage has done in terms of Payroll 2.0, and one more, if you could just go forward, Ty, is introduce the ability to leverage an employee self-service module. One of the biggest requests I've seen from Sage 100 payroll customers in terms of functionality they're looking for is the ability outside of like a paperless office to have a portal where employees could go to, self-credential, log in, and access their pay stubs or their benefit information at any time. So if we align Sage HRMS HR with Sage 100 payroll, we can now do this with Payroll 2.0 with the updated framework and the updated technology. So again, without disrupting that function, more than anything else, we want to let you know that there's good things coming and continuing to happen for payroll. And if you do have a need to extend that footprint, just let us know as we're here, and certainly happy to help. So with that, I'll get back to our regularly scheduled program and let Ty take us through the demonstration of Sage 100 Payroll 2.0, which I know everybody's been waiting for. So Ty, go ahead and take it back.
All right, so let's see. We're going to see Payroll 2.0, so give me a second to minimize here and maximize here. So let's just go ahead and dive into it. Let's look at it. So this is the new Payroll 2.0 as it stands. And it's telling me I have data entry. What did I do? So let's look at it. So here's the new employee maintenance screen. A lot of the new features in here, you're going to notice that we now have the ability for job titles in the system. We have a lot more status changes in the system that we didn't have before. You're going to notice up here, here's my employee number. Here's the features I was telling you about, the first name, the last name, an actual true middle name in the system. Over here on the additional tab, you're going to notice we now track for some of the EEO compliance stuff that is very minimal. If you want it to, obviously Nathan just talked about HRMS. If you need way more functionality than the basic stuff that Sage provides, that will be your solution. But Sage has some minimal information that's here in the system, veteran information, emergency contacts. You can now set those up in the system with relationships and phone numbers. You have the ability to track up to 2. Here's the new benefits as they're now terming it in the system. And this is one of the cool features that we didn't have before, but that we do have is we now have time off, but you now have eligibility dates for time off. So for a lot of people, we have people that you give them vacation, right? But their vacation, they're not eligible to take it though. They might be accruing it when they first start working there, but they're not eligible to take what they've accrued until a certain date. So you now have the ability to put eligibility dates that go along with that time off, that our time off benefit schedules and stuff in the system will take into account these eligibility dates in the system. Same thing for medical coverage. You can put that in the system and put in what the effective date for what that is. That affects the ACA reporting that's built into our Sage system in terms of that effective date. Then down here, you obviously have vacation, sick, personal. It tracks the information. It used to be, remember in the old payroll, it used to be a separate button. It's now in the system as part of the actual system, and you're not having to do little buttons and remember which button takes you where in the system. Taxes are here in the system. I'm actually going to expand my screen a bit so we can kind of see the full gamut of what that looks like in the system. And so here's federal. You set up your filing status, who your exemptions are, if you have to do any kind of overrides, so on and so forth in the system. So again, instead of a button pop out, it's now just simply here as part of the system. I can add additional ones if I need to add additional ones in the system. So if for some reason I need to set up multiple profiles for a specific employee because they need to calculate different taxes, I can do it. And you're going to also notice local tax reporting is built into Sage. There's no longer an add-on or anything for that. So if you have to deal with local taxes, it is now part of the system. You can see this employee has federal, state, and then they also have a local tax that the system is also calculating for. So you now have that ability also built into the Sage system. Pay rates, this is the biggest change. You used to have pay rate 1, pay rate 2. That's all you had. You now have 9 pay rates that you have in the system. The system will track the changes in the change audit report so that you can have the ability to go back and if you need to, be able to run reporting on that. We also have a new feature up here called alternate check name. So perfect example is this. My legal name is Tyshawn Duncan Whitcomb. My check, a lot of the times, comes as Ty Whitcomb. My bank knows who I am. They've known me for 20 some years. They don't blink an eye. So if you have employees that say, for instance, their name is Matthew Johnson, but you can put in here the check and go as Matt Johnson if he wants that, or somebody got married and their name is this way, but it needs to be a different way because maybe they haven't changed their social security card at the social security office yet, but the name needs to change for banking purposes. Use the check name however you need to use it in the system, but you now have that capability also. You have your earnings over here. What I want to kind of show you about the earnings is the perfect way for me to segue into this is to show you earnings because of the new feature in that we now have the ability to have multiple years of history. So this case, this is my demo data, so it's only showing you 2 years of history, but I have the ability to show multiple years of history here in the system. Same thing over here for my deductions. If I come over here and look at my deductions, I can look at it the same way in the system. Say for instance, for my employee, I need to give them a new deduction. This is also where I can give them deductions that are allowable in the system, deductions that are allowable in the system. So over here, I would just simply hit the add button. I would then just simply come in here and say, well, this person now needs to have health insurance. I can make it automatic, which means every time I run a check for them and their deductions auto-populate during the entry of it, I can give it the amount of that deduction in the system if there's a goal, so it knows when to stop in the system. If for some reason I'm just turning this on for this employee and I haven't been turning it on, obviously I have the ability to backfill the amount so it goes against the balance in the system. But this is all I need to do in the system for me to simply add another deduction for the employee that will automatically calculate for them during payroll data entry. Over here on the Pay History tab, here are all my checks. I can drill into and look at every single one of my checks in the system if I need to. And then, like I said, multiple history. So if I had 4 years of history, I would be able to click in and see all 4 years in this same system. All the way payroll is now is you now have history. So a lot of people at the end of the year, they would be creating a backup of that company so that they can run a check for the 2020 year. That's gone. So when 2019 ends this year, at the end of the year, and you need to run a check for January 2nd of 2020, run that check. When it comes time to run your W-2s, it knows exactly what to do. There's no reason anymore for you to be rushing to make a copy so that you can keep moving. Same thing on the quarter. There is no reason to do quarter backups anymore. You can go ahead, for instance, July, September, on October 5th, I need to run a check, I can run it. I can still go back and run my third quarter 941 and the numbers are going to be completely accurate. I do not have to segment that off just because of the way history is now stored. It's like my sales order module or my inventory module. It knows to put the data in the correct buckets, and it's not like the old school. I don't know if I've been doing this since the DOS days, so I've been doing this since Sage 2.0, which is, let's not say how old I am, but it was you remember you had to do everything in a bucket. You had a current month bucket and you had the future bucket. That was only 2 buckets of history that you can hold. Those days are gone. And so it's very nice to have a new payroll system that kind of embraces the architecture of the other modules. Up here for the More button, you have the ACA information. If the employee's turned on for direct deposit, you can do that and look at it there. And then you have your tax summary. So this is where the tax summary button that you used to have on the additional tab, it's just been moved here in the system. I can always come here and look at the employee's summary, broken down however I need to break it down. I can look at that information in the system. Whatever quarter I want to look at it, I can all see that information there. And then if I decide to hit the detail button, it kind of gives me a nice pretty way of looking at the wages, what the employee's tax was, the employer's tax, and if I need to get a time worked, I can also get time worked. A lot of employees or employers have the ability to look at this information. A lot of people have to do FMLA reporting. There's really great reporting and easier ways to get that out of the system if you have to report that kind of information. So what does the new payroll data entry look like? It is actually a beautiful thing to see. I like it. It's kind of neat to see in the system. Here's that new check date field that I was telling you about. This is where it is in the system. So whatever my check date is in the system, I would just simply put in 07/25/2019. What that does for me in the system, say, hey, it's on the current quarter. Do you still want to proceed? I can simply say yes for this. It's also going to tell me, hey, because of this, I now have to recalc my tax calc, which is fine because I knew I had an open payroll data entry in the system. So what it's going to do for all these employees that I have in the system, it will know automatically to recalc that for them in the system. So let's go over here and look at some of this in the system. Here's my information. You can kind of see in the system all my information. Some of the things that I think is kind of neat in the system that they have changed, which I think has been long overdue. Say, for instance, hypothetically, somebody's wages has changed and maybe they have a deduction that's percentage based, based off of their wages. There is now in the system, if it was a percentage based, you would have a new button down here called recalc. And all I would do is hit that recalc. And instead of me having to delete every deduction and add them all back on again, the system would have automatically been able to just recalc all those percentages for me automatically in the system without me having to do anything. So that's one of the really cool features that are here in the system. Actually, they moved it up here. I would just hit recalc deductions and it would have recalced it for me. All right. So what was it saying about that in the system? I'm going to kind of show you what that looks like. here is the payroll tax calculation that they're talking about. What this is doing for me at this time, and actually it's telling me my payroll tax service is down. I got an email on this, but what it would have done in the system, it would go out to the tax service, calculated my taxes, making sure that all the rates and everything were correct, and it made sure that it applied all that information correctly to all my employees the way that it needed to do. Then it's no different. I would have still done my same payroll data entry audit report that we always have printed for years and years in the system. You would have been able to review that. You're going to notice that the layout of the payroll data entry audit report is slightly different. It's all crystal based now. So all the reports that are in payroll are crystal based, which means they're all editable. They are all changeable in the system. So it's not like how it used to be where it was DOS, you couldn't touch it. All these reports are now have the ability now to be edited in crystal. So if there's information you would like to see on here that's not on some of these reports, or information that you would like to remove some of these reports, you have the ability to make those changes now in the system, which is kind of nice that we didn't have that before in the system. The time off register used to be the old benefits register. In the system, you're going to notice that naming convention has changed. If you're running job costs in the system and you have flagged your job for certified payroll, there is now a certified payroll worksheet that is also included in the system. That's a totally separate demo if you want to learn more about job costs and how it interacts with payroll to get that certified payroll in the system. You're going to also notice in the system when you come in here to run your check printing, like I was saying before in the system, there is no check date in here anymore. That check date came from payroll data entry, and that's where that information came from. So that was the one thing I wanted to show you. From that point forward, from payroll tax calculation, nothing has changed. It's the same way you've always done it. The only difference is you can do batches, and the tax calculation actually goes out to the web to make sure you're running the latest rates based off the check date that is on that you've entered during the payroll data entry at the very beginning of the pay cycle, and it goes through and calculates everything in the system for you. What over here, I want to jump in here really quick into the payroll options, just because this is one of the things that I wanted to show you in the system. So this time off tab, this is where it was talking about the time off descriptions. It automatically says vacation, sick, and personal, but you can make this be whatever you want it to be. I can make this be PTO, sick, and I don't know, I'm just going to call it fun. It doesn't really matter to me in the system what I call it. And what that does is now in the system for me, that ends up going into my time off maintenance. So now when I look through the whole system, it's now called PTO, sick, and fun. I can call it whatever I want in the system, and it goes out there and it does what I need it to do in the system. Time off maintenance is still the same, nothing's changed. It was more of a naming convention than anything else when it came to the time offs in the system. So what I was talking about earlier, let's go ahead, and I don't want this, I want this. When I briefly discussed it earlier, but I kind of want to just kind of show you what that is. When you come in here, this is what we were talking about with tax rules. Now you would just come in here based off of your earnings code, and you would just come in here and select the earnings code that applies to your situation. So in this case, my time is regular. I'm obviously going to be looking for regular time, applying a regular wage to it. If you're doing overtime, if you have an overtime earnings code, you can apply the overtime wages rule. If you have, say, for instance, an overtime premium, there's a separate one for overtime premium wages. So overtime premium wages being, I know like sometimes from like 1 to those, like what we call the grave shift hours, and some weekend hours, you have to give them a premium, so that obviously the tax is calculated differently than it would on some of the other ones, like a regular overtime. Say for instance, I work past 5 till 9, that's regular overtime. I'm not going to give them premium wages, so the tax is calculated differently than it would. So I would just simply select regular wages. That's it. I don't have to know, okay, do I need to turn it on for, does it need to calculate FICA? Does it need to calculate for this? It's all built into these tax rules in the system automatically for me. So we don't have to worry about that or call our accountant to figure out, do I check this box? Do I not check this box? Which is what we've been doing for years whenever we had questions, whenever we did our setups. Over here in the company tax group setup, this is what I had talked about briefly in the system over here for tax rates. Here's where I can go through and set it up in the system. Keep in mind, for every state, there might be multiple things that there's rates for depending on the state that you're calculating for, but I can just simply put in my effective date of when I want it to be in the system, and then the system automatically knows how to calculate that for in the system. So if I have more than one, I would just select it, what was the date that it's effective in the system. So, and then whatever the rate is. So this rate might be 2.3%. And what it knows is when this date comes, it's looking at my check date, it would then know automatically to calculate whatever the corresponding rate is automatically for me. I don't have to necessarily keep track of that information on my own anymore in the system. There's one more piece. We still have ACA reporting. A lot of people, some people do use it, some people don't use it. I'm just going to briefly just discuss it because it's in the system. If you have, for some reason, have to do ACA reporting for any employees in the system, we do have the ability to track that ACA in the system, track whatever the offerages of coverage is in the system. It will hold it. We can copy it to future years so we don't have to keep setting the same information up over and over and over again in the system. If for some reason they have covered individuals, say for instance children or family, we have the ability to put that information in there and what months they were covered. And then the system, using the federal state tax reporting, that hasn't gone away, but using the federal and state tax reporting that comes with your SAGE system, you then will have the ability to then produce any reporting that goes along with that. So if I need to print 941s, if I need to produce my 1095 or my 1094, the B or the C's, it's here in the system. It's still in my federal state tax reporting. Obviously, as we remember, it overlays Atrix. So when you select it, it goes out to Atrix, which is our service that provides your forms and stuff. It stays current. It is a free service. The only time you have to pay for Atrix is if you choose the paid option. Paid option being you let them print them and send them to the employees on your behalf. You have them file the 941s and so on and so forth for you. Otherwise, when you're a 941, it does pop up a lot of buy me, buy me. Ignore it. Just select the print only option. You can print it and file it yourself. It is good for federal and it's good for state. So if you have states that you're doing information for, then it will automatically know then what reporting needs to happen then by state. All right, so that's kind of what you have there in the system in terms of the federal, state, and tax reporting. The other thing that's in the system is you have a new time track module in the system. This is the replacement to time card. So that's a kind of a separate conversation, but I will briefly go through it for you. Just so you know, mine is not even turned on my system because I haven't turned it on in my job costs, but you do have the ability to do time track entry, the punch in and punch out. This again, like I said before, this is the replacement to the job costs module, sorry, not the job cost, to the time card module in the system. So actually, I'm going to just go ahead and real quick and turn it on so I can just kind of show you briefly what it looks like. You would go through and set up that same information. If you need it to link to job costs, you can link it to your job costs. Otherwise, you can just simply just do the regular time track entry in here for all your employees in the system. So this is the replacement to time card. The time card module is no more. This is where you would do it, and you're going to also notice that time card, or now it's called time track, it is now in the same GUI as the other modules, and it's now been brought up to the 4.x framework also. All right, that is it for Payroll 2.0. Do we have any questions if that anybody has in the system? Just let me know and I will answer any questions. I will open it up to whatever questions we have. Either post it in the chat and I'll be able to see it, or just go ahead, raise your hand, so on and so forth, and we'll see if we can get your question answered for you.
Hi, I don't see any questions coming in, but we're going to give it a couple more seconds. So if anyone has any questions, go ahead and ask now, or you can always reach out to us offline and we can we can address them there. So with that said, as Nathan mentioned previously, we will be sending a recording of this webinar to all registrants and attendees. And I did want to bring up the fact that we have a webinar coming up on July 30th called How to Launch E-Commerce and See ROI in Just 8 Weeks. So if you're interested in joining that one, you can register on the SWK website under our events page. But if you have any other questions, please feel free to contact us. And I don't see, oh, we do have one question that came in. If the tax service is down, can we still run payroll?
No, that's only catch-22. So yes, no. If the tax service is down, you cannot run payroll. Very rarely is the tax service down. That error that popped up on my system telling me that the tax service is down is actually a glitch in my Windows registry. That because I'm running a very old version of payroll, they've been subsequent versions of the payroll update that's been since released. So that's the reason why I got that message. Actually, the fix for that actually got circulated out the past few days. I've been seeing it, but I haven't applied it to my system yet just because it's a demo system. But no, I hate to say it, if it's down, you're down. But knock on wood, I haven't had that happen to any of my clients since Payroll 2's been released, and Payroll 2.0 has been out since last year.
Good question. I don't think anything else has come in. So with that said, we're going to conclude the webinar. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at helpdesk@swktech.com. Thanks, everyone.